Right, so of all the countries in the world, how many do you think were daft enough to let private companies take over their entire water infrastructure? Yeah, just one. Most countries actually made such an idea completely illegal, and quite understandably, since we need water to exist, all of us. None of us can survive without it. And this country allowed media spin to convince them that allowing people to profit from it would be absolutely fine. What could possibly go wrong? Allowed a Tory Prime Minister and Margaret Thatcher to claim our nationalised water supplies that her government were overseeing was failing because it was being engineered that way. She was underfunding them on purpose, just as we've been watching the Tories do with our NHS for years now. And now we're living with the fallout from all of that in the form of higher bills, poor services, water shortages, polluted rivers and seas. It's been a total disaster, and it should be a no-brainer for an opposition to this government overseeing that pledge to reverse it. And of course, Keir Starmer did make just that pledge, did he not? He pledged to renationalise water, energy, rail and mail in his Labour leadership campaign. So of course, he's probably gone back on all of it now. Fiscal rules his party have set themselves, hiding behind those two meaningless words as it's just their excuse to not change things. Their message to those in charge of the water companies and the like, that they're a safe pair of hands for them and not for us. But let's not blame the politicians who let it happen entirely, of course. The water companies themselves can hardly be absolved of blame, can they? How hard must it be to be the CEO of a water company, after all? You ever given it any thought? The product you sell literally falls out of the sky, doesn't it? It's all free. You don't have to round it up or anything like that. You just let it drop into your reservoirs, all nice and lovely. And your customers, well, you've got plenty of customers because they're dictated to you by geography. People cannot switch from one water company to another, after all. So you have this ready-made customer base that can't go anywhere. They have no choice but to be your customer. We all need water, after all. What an absolute cartel, isn't it? But it doesn't stop there either. Your prices are set by the regulator. You'd think a proper, decent regulator would ensure responsible pricing and block rampant profiteering, but it would seem OFWAT are more in on it with them, allowing sufficient income for the company for supposed investing in the running of the service, as well as plenty to pay those ever-greedy shareholders. Economist Richard Murphy has actually worked out that water companies average a profit margin of some 35%. So for every pound you pay in your water bills, 35 pence of it is profit. And that's a staggeringly high margin. With that much cash coming in, you'd think they could manage not to turn our rivers into something that resembles a cappuccino made out of crap. You'd think they could have built the odd reservoir or two as our climate has got drier over the last several decades, instead of selling them off to developers instead. Or fixing a few broken pipes, maybe. Surely they can afford to do that. Fixing leaks, which lose millions of litres a day. Not an exaggeration either, but no. That'd mean less cash in the coffers, less cash on the spreadsheet, less cash for the investors, the shareholders, the owners. The mismanagement over the last several decades has been criminal, but it's also inexcusable when you consider there's no competition, no sales team requirements, just managing the water that drops in your lap virtually, falls out of the sky, store it, clean it, and not dumping effluents across the country with it. But of course it failed, as privatisation always does. Ultimately, the shareholders always want more. Companies always want to post bigger and bigger profits as it makes them look more successful. But as life has become harder for us all during this cost of living crisis, large profits are now seen for very much what they are, pure greed and not success, except it is also apparent to those actually in power or those who want to be. Our bills are too high, and we're paying for what? The inability to find safe, clean bathing water, the inability to water our gardens as hosepipe bans return yet again, or in my case, never went away. Cornwall's been under a hosepipe ban since last summer, and it remains in place, and I can't see it lifting at all anytime soon. And the maddening thing is, by law, all these water companies have statutory obligations to maintain all of this, keep it all in good shape, make sure we've got a decent supply, effect repairs properly, and increase capacity if that is required. Where is OFWAT in all of this? Where is this watchdog, this regulator? Well, oddly enough, government ministers are asking the same questions. But hang on, because OFWAT can do no more than the remit it is given. And the remit it was given by government, incidentally, was to basically not get in the way of the profits. OFWAT is a convenient excuse for all of this. I've spoken about non-ministerial government departments before in other videos, and OFWAT is another one of these, basically a quango, an offshoot of a government department. They report to DEFRA, but are actually overseen by civil servants from the Cabinet Office, where why the heck is something so important not overseen directly by a minister? I have no idea. Really, all I can think of is its plausible deniability. In other words, when the shit hits the fan, or local stream, as the case may be, the government can hold its hands up and say, oh, we didn't know about that, let's blame the regulator for this. And so they do. And we see news stories about ministers being urged to crack down on failing watchdogs. It's a scam. They are literally part of government, just one the government turns a blind eye to until something goes wrong, or until we get wind of it, and the wind here stinks of poo. Since privatisation of water happened back in 1989, the privatised water companies born out of those failing water authorities, weird how all of a sudden they stopped failing when they suddenly got the cash required of them, isn't it? What a pity it started going into investors' pockets instead of managing the service then. Because they've made £72 billion in profits since privatisation. But that is £72 billion worth of investment in our water infrastructure that we've lost. Every broken pipe, every turd in the sea, every dry hosepipe, every below-level reservoir, every leak, every sewage dump should have the faces of Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair stamped all over them as a reminder of why we're in this boat, why we're in this mess, as the two main leaders of both main parties during my lifetime deserve to share the blame for it, one for starting it and the other for being determined to continue it. Blair said he felt his duty was to continue Thatcher's legacy instead of being the leader of an opposition party and being opposed to what they were doing and pledging to undo it as he should have done. And now we're back to Blair on steroids as Keir Starmer styles himself. So with neither the Tories nor Labour again here and now prepared to change anything, despite the disaster of water shortages and lack of clean water spaces that we face, can we really afford to keep voting for one or the other of these two parties? How important is water to you? And not having enough, it should scare the shit out of you. We all need it. It certainly does me. It's especially galling that neither party will move to this position since it is overwhelmingly what the public want. 69% of all voters in a recent YouGov poll want it renationalised. Broken down by the two main parties, that's 66% of Tory voters, 2 out of every 3 of them want it renationalised now, despite their party being the one that privatised it to start with. And 82% of Labour voters do. Can I suggest you all stop being Tory voters and Labour voters then? Because if you need water, they aren't interested. Let's go back to those 35 pence in the pound profits, though, because now to clean up all the sewage the companies have been dumping, they want to increase our already high water bills by 40%. They now want us to pay even more for the mess they made. Government response to that? Oh, nothing to do with us. It's a private interest. Blame OFWAT. Nah, not good enough. We're onto that scam. Try again. And of course, on top of all of that, despite the massive profits and the poor service delivered, these companies are also riddled with debt. Collectively, the private water companies now have £60 billion of debt between them. When they were nationalised, they had no debt. How can they possibly be so badly managed? I'll say again, your product falls out of the sky at no cost to you. Your customers are actually your captives. You're making a huge amount of profit, 35 pence in the pound, yet still cannot deliver basic supply problems without leaks, without fouling the environment, and without accruing mind-boggling massive debts. How have you managed it? Such is the problem with privatisation. Once again, it all comes down to the central tenet of what privatisation is all about, and that is greed. Shareholders need their dividends, and they expect them to grow. For decades, increasing those payouts has been the priority for these companies and not delivering the service for the country. That should be a criminal act. That should require custodial sentences. Thames Water is probably the ultimate example right now of this. £14 billion in debt on its own. It pays its boss £2 million a year, and now it's on the brink of collapse. Not that the owners will be worried. They don't live here, owned as they are by investment companies in China and Abu Dhabi. The CEO has just quit, run away from the mess. Well, what now then? Will the taps run dry in people's houses? Are bailiffs going to repossess the water in their reservoirs? The excuses get no less ridiculous either. South East Water, another one with issues, have had to bring in a hosepipe ban again already. And their CEO has blamed people working from home for the water shortages. It's literally your job to ensure supply, man. The pandemic wasn't anything new. People, as a result, have been working from home for some time and still are, particularly if they happen to be vulnerable. You absolute weasel, just shut your hole and stop making such pathetic excuses. All privatisation has been a disaster. There's no exception to it. None of it has worked in our interest. But privatising water was the biggest mistake of them all. It urgently must be renationalised before things get any worse. But instead, we're going to be paying more by the looks of it, as instead of letting the water company collapse, giving them ample excuse to take it back into public hands, they could pick it up for £1 from the receivers. They're perhaps going to instead be putting together a bailout. The Tories will not ever accept privatisation is a failure, despite now shelling out, because it's literally just proven that it is, even if it means temporarily renationalising it, exposing the con. When they have to take control of a failing essential system, and we've seen it happen with the railways a lot, as you know, actually it's really the answer to the entire problem and not the stopgap concurrent governments have kept treating it as, because they would rather see somebody rich make insane profits off of it. Every water shortage we face is now government failure because they know what needs to be done. They're just ideologically opposed to it, still following Thatcher's orders from beyond the grave to all intent, having never deviated from what she brought in. And we simply can't live with the failure continuing. That has to be changed. There has to be a shift, and people have to be brave enough to go to the ballot and vote for that. Because just getting the Tories out isn't going to be enough. Not when the obvious alternative party to them will not do any different. It's Green Party policy to renationalise the lot. They're the only ones still hailing it, and they do it by halting shareholder payouts with immediate effect, bringing in the companies back to public ownership as quickly as is possible thereafter, because water should be a human right. It should never have been left to make profits out of. It's disaster capitalism, and it has to end, no ifs or buts. And after you've liked, shared, and subscribed to the channel, as I sincerely hope you will, my recommended video to follow this is more on why your water bill is already so high. A big Tory turd of a sleaze story that went vastly underreported. And I'll catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.